Yeah, feel free to unmute and just vocalize it. That would be probably the better way to do it. The beginning part of this, I want to just preface, I have opted not to have a formal introduction because many of you know me, and also you could read the very nice intro that they printed with the registration, and to understand where I'm coming from here. Because I'm an architectural historian now and a retired interior designer, of course you have to have the history lesson first. So before we get into the projects that I want to show you, I'm going to tell you a little bit uh, about the importance of preservation, and then get to where the interior designer's role in that is. So the first part, if you can save your questions until I'm through with that, but when I'm showing you the projects, if you have a question about any part that I'm telling you, please feel free to ask. I will welcome that. I'm going to just start with a quote from Henry James, author Henry James. He said, "The act of obliteration is breathlessly swift. However fast history can be made, it can be unmade still faster." Architecture is one of the few examples of tangible history that is available to all to enjoy and appreciate. These treasures all have a story to tell. For instance, well, I'm going back to the other one because I want to tell you, this is Park Church in Elmira, which is one of the projects you will see. And that was the home to the Langdon family worship and their son-in-law, Mark Twain. And this building, this Italianate, is in Rochester, and this is the William Selden House. It's been adapted to an attorney's office, a civil rights specialist. But this was home to the attorney of Susan B. Anthony. And he famously, without her permission and to her utter disgust, paid her fine to keep her out of jail. But of course, she wanted nothing better than go to jail. These homes have a story to tell, and they line the beautiful neighborhoods and streets of our cities across the country. And they can be grand or they can be modest, such as this craftsman bungalow. Now, it was 1971 when I found myself on the battleground of a deteriorated inner city neighborhood that was once known as the Silk Stocking District of Rochester, a place where both mansions and modest cottages were standing in tribute to Rochester's first citizens. Today it is known as Cornhill, Rochester's first neighborhood, the Third Ward. It was tired and on the brink of extinction at this time. This is what would greet people in 1971. In the early 1960s, the Landmark Society of Western New York, a preservation organization that was founded in 1937 to protect one important Rochester landmark, the Campbell Whittlesey House, which represented the growth of Rochester following the Erie canals coming through the 100-acre tract of Nathaniel Rochester. It was founded to protect that one landmark. Luckily, they were housed in that particular building at the time. They convinced the city to have a survey of all of the landmark, of all of the homes in that area, all the buildings in that area, to see what was there, what was valuable, what should be kept, what was expendable. They developed a rating system with the help of Paul Malo, he's the late Paul Malo. He was the professor emeritus of architecture at Syracuse University, my alma mater. And they developed a rating system using green, red, yellow, and brown, brown meaning expendable, red plus meaning of highest importance, and green and yellow meaning good and contributing to the neighborhood. What they found was a collection of every architectural, excellent examples of every architectural style popular in the day, from Federal, Greek Revival, Italianate, Italian Villa, Second Empire, and on. This slide shows the house in the left, the photograph in the left is as it was when it was new. The one in the middle shows what it looked like in 1971, and the one on the right in color shows what it looks like today. And you can see some strange things happening. You notice in the original photograph, there's a porch, which was removed because they probably did it because it had deteriorated or they wanted to modernize, who knows what the reason was. But they sandblasted the brick to take it down to the natural brick because it had been painted, but they left the evidence of the history there, which I thought was very interesting because that helps tell the viewer, and don't forget, this is a living museum that we can take a tour of this neighborhood and see all these wonderful things. Most of the buildings in the Third Ward were deteriorated to one extent or the other. And over the next 10 years, I was privileged to witness the area's renaissance and the spirited people who fought their way through many obstacles, not even knowing whether their investment would come to anything. One of the caveats was, even if they bought the house for $1, they would put their funds in and they have to live there for a period of time because home ownership and being on premises was the most important aspect of these renewals. Now, I don't want to go there yet. We were finally discovering what Europe and other parts of the world already knew, that these structures bring a degree of visual pleasure that modern architecture cannot offer, but also a deeper and subtler gratification of a sense of connection to the movement of time. The 19th century was a time in our history when fortunes were made in growing industry and transportation. The wealthy wanted to show how successful they had become. And taste in domestic architecture was very fickle during this time. Here we see in this one, a Gothic revival house, which was one of the popular styles, and you can see the various details of it. Beautifully done. These houses was made possible, ironically, through originally transportation. For Rochester, the Erie Canal coming through in 1823, which made Rochester the first boom town in America. And it brought not only materials to build these houses, but it also brought the immigrants from Europe, such as Germany, Italy, France, Eastern Europe, to lend their expertise, their craftsman skills to the building of these houses. This becomes the problem today because it's very hard to find. They're retiring, and I know the people that I worked through the years, the wonderful craftsmen, we're trying to replace them, and there's a great need for that. So the cost of materials was low, particularly brick. And in many places, you'd find that they painted the brick because they would let the builder use different colored bricks, different types of bricks, but they were going to paint it because that showed that there was an extra measure of wealth that they could show, that they didn't have to keep the brick the natural color. And there were a lot of surprises in the Third Ward when the paint came off. And unfortunately, this was early on in the preservation movement, and there was a lot of sandblasting, destructive sandblasting going on in the neighborhood. We use that as an example of what not to do today. But they found, to their horror, that there were several different colored bricks under there, and they were meant to be painted. But the tragedy was, once you sandblast, it's very hard to put that finish back on. Anyway, the lifestyle of the people at this time, and you as designers, do not worry. If you do a design project, you do not have to recreate this. I can honestly say, in all of the Victorian era, and I use the word era because when you hear the word Victorian, It is an era. It is a space in time. The many different architectural styles of that era are called Victorian era styles, or better yet, their names would be it Greek Revival. Greek Revival is actually before the Victorian. It would be the Italianate, Italian Villa, Queen Anne, Second Empire. These are the homes of that era. But here's a wonderful over-the-top interior done at that time. We have a lot of fun showing these. Now, as I said, it's amazing to think that as recently as 50 years ago, these things were considered not fashionable nor productive. And government, through a federally funded program known as Urban Renewal, partnered with businesses and local governments to tear down perfectly sound and buildings that they cleared the land that they'd stand on and then maybe fill the empty spaces that they created. In many cases in our nation's cities, their entire architectural heritage was wiped out. Lots of places in Rochester still have empty places, parking lots, so to speak. If there is an isolated structure, it's been torn away from the context that it once fitted. Perhaps cheaply built housing projects filled the spaces. Municipal buildings, all made of 30-year materials. They've not aged gracefully. How many times have you gone through a town that you know to be historic, and it's lined with vinyl-sided housing from the 19th century? Let's go to the next slide here. I'm going to continue with the story, and then we will get to some of these projects. Now, it's ironic, in the beginning of our country, it was the development of the transcontinental railroads and man-made waterways such as the Erie Canal. They were major factors in our nation's growth. Another mode of transportation that was a major cause of the demise of our urban areas was the automobile. One could blame Henry Ford for making it affordable for most people in the population, because for the first time in history, people were able to live outside of their place of work. This marked the emergence of the suburbs across America and the beginning of the deterioration of our nation's urban places. Another factor was the Great Depression, which started in 1929, as you all know, as businesses failed and the plunge of the stock market brought on the financial ruin of the wealthy family. The grand estates were either sold, rented, or in many cases deserted altogether. With the initiation of the income tax and burgeoning property taxes, it became increasingly prohibitive to own large, expensive estates. Those whose fortunes were still intact had already moved out of the city to cleaner and more open space. So the houses that they left, some were turned into boarding houses where you could buy for 25 cents a cot for the evening, or the rooms, the many bedrooms were turned into apartments. At the end of World War I, our soldiers returned home, or World War II, I'm sorry, returned to their hometowns to settle down, save their money, and buy nice little houses in the suburbs to raise their families. From their suburban homes, they wanted quick and easy routes to get back and forth to work every day. And what would be better than high-speed expressways with circular arterial routes joining them to let people travel around the perimeter of our cities? What did that do? It succeeded in choking the life out of our nation's business districts. One source recently placed Rochester's inner loop on a list of the 50 worst highways in America for what it did to the city that it was circling. Now, Urban Renewal was sponsored the planned demolition of deteriorated structures within our city created by this, including historic ones. Thankfully, the urban renewal program also raised national attention to what the nation was losing, and the historic preservation was born. Preservation sees the interest of business and companies search for older buildings within the cities to adapt to their needs, adaptive reuse. Federal tax credits and other financial incentives spurred this trend. Corporate leaders found that the image of the historic structure enhanced their position in the community, giving their businesses a sense of permanence and strength. Many local governments have adopted preservation ordinances in the recent years and that protect and designate structures, but the exterior only. Very few buildings are protected on the inside as well. And without careful consideration of the interior historic detailing, we are destined to have mostly historic shells. As designers, we have a great responsibility to our environment. We make decisions that can affect a permanent change for the good or for the bad of projects. We are the influencers, and we should never take that role lightly. Knowledge is key here, and we must know what we can change, how to make the changes authentic and appropriate. We must do no harm. Research is the most important part of preservation, of the preservation process. We can't all have the answers in our heads, so we must know where to find them. If preservation design becomes a focus of your business, a personal library of reference books and architectural history and structures would be a very, very good thing. Of course, when I started my emphasis in this particular area, we couldn't do our research online. That is a privilege that we have now. And even though I have a room full of books back there, those books are all on architectural history and preservation. And I'm very proud of my library. How many times, excuse me, do I use it exclusively for a project? Very little, but I still love having them. But the information is online. And I have a bibliography, as a matter of fact, that I can make available to you. My scanner is not working now, so I would have to get it to somebody and they would have to scan it and get it to you. But it might be helpful even to find websites to look up things. Now, unfortunately, not all of our clients will understand the importance of their responsibility as stewards. Some of you may have already experienced this. I know I have. As stewards of their historic property, what do we do? Some property owners still feel that preservation laws interfere with their rights as property owners. One of our roles could be to educate our clients about the value of their historic home or structure or business. You may be able to show them that making appropriate changes can enhance their property's value while it still meets their business and personal needs. This is the challenge of being a preservation designer or being involved with this type of projects. And I loved that challenge. The more challenge, the better. And grew to love doing the research. Now, as an example, if a client would like to put in a skylight in their historic roof, perhaps, or their office building, you could show them perhaps how to bring natural, like daylight lighting into it without creating that or harming the integrity of the roof. Although it has been done and it has been done tastefully. So that said, there usually are ways to get around things that can still be appropriate. If the project you're working in is a designated local landmark, then you would have to get a certificate of appropriateness for something like that. Anything affecting the exterior, such as changing the footprint, changing windows, changing even doors, Not paint usually. Most municipalities do not dictate the use of color. Some do. Penn Yan, New York does still. But I know the town of Brighton, where I served for many years on the Preservation Commission, did not dictate paint color, but they did have an ordinance against painting masonry that was not already painted, if it was a designated property, for good reason. Once it's painted, and it may not be appropriate to the history of that particular property. So certificates of appropriateness are not meant to bar people from making changes. It's just to encourage them to do the right thing, not only for the neighborhood's good, but also for their own, to keep the value of their property where it should be. It's proven that communities that embrace historic preservation and have ordinances to protect their historic stock actually are more stable economically. It's been proven. Now, each designer or architect tackling such a project should ask themselves this question: would I have the courage to walk away from a client who would not want to follow appropriate guidelines? Another valuable tool for the designer is a list of artisans and contractors who are familiar with the contingencies of these old treasures, delicate treasures. And the Landmark Society of Western New York, if you are in their 9-county jurisdiction in New York State, is a valuable resource for this. The great challenge for us occurs when we must undo bad decisions of the past. And at the end, if we have time, I've got some images of some horrific things that have been done to the exterior of buildings that I would love to show you. I put them on the end because I'm thinking, well, we're concentrating on interiors, but they are fun to see, sad to see, but interesting. Now, you're not working with museums. So if you wanted to move a wall or remove a wall, unless it was load bearing, of course, you could do that to achieve your plan or an open concept or what your client may want. This can be done. It's the historic fabric that you must or should strive to retain, because that can never be replaced. A new vinyl window, it can never replace the original wood windows, and most wood windows are repairable. The window Bible writer, Steve Jordan, he has a wonderful book, and he can be reached in Pain in the Glass, PAIN in the glass.com. But Steve Jordan, he has a wonderful book on the repair of windows, and you can do almost anything. And that's highly recommended. We're going to take a look at some case studies of my preservation work that I'm very proud of. This took place in the last 40 years. Oh my gosh, 35 years of my business. My business lasted 54 years, I'm proud to say. And but I became a preservation specialist in 1985. And my training was not in college. It was not in my schooling at all. It all happened subsequent. I graduated from Syracuse University, got a tremendous education in design and what is good design and how to achieve good design. But the campus was emerging as a mid-century modern campus, ignoring its 19th century founding. We never learned one thing about Crowds College, where I took most of my classes, or the Hall of Languages, which is the centerpiece of the campus. So it was afterwards. They embrace it now, don't get me wrong. They embrace it, celebrate it, and it works together through the passage of time. But we can't rely on our formal education. Maybe now there are preservation courses, but back then it wasn't heard of. So plus the preservation movement really was just, was it beginning yet? Not really. 1965. No, it had to wait a couple years to do that. So let me go on. The ones that are in blue are the ones that you're going to see. And I will describe what I have done, some of the thought process, and I invite you to ask questions if you have them. This project, I start with this because this one has the most emotional ties for me. It was formerly the Central Presbyterian Church in Rochester, New York on South Plymouth Avenue. It was my church. I was baptized, confirmed in this building. And my father was an elder in this building and sang in the choir. I had dreams of singing in the choir there, and never did because the church closed in 1974. I joined another church as an adult and sing in their choir. But I sing in this building with the Rochester Oratorio Society for their concerts. This building was adapted to be the Huckstein Memorial Music School. It is a place where now students, no matter what their financial need, can come and learn music and learn it from some of the best teachers. And it's also a performance hall, and they teach children Orff instruments. And I'm going to just show you some of the history of this building. This is the Central Presbyterian Church as it looked in its original rendering. And here is a newspaper clipping of its sanctuary, which was one of the areas that I was charged with working on and adapting from a place of worship in the round to a performance hall. And we had to tend to the problems of acoustics, because this building, while the space, while it had wonderful acoustics, it was only when the pews were filled, because it had wooden pews, it had no carpeting, nothing. When it was filled with people, it was a joy. So that was one of the problems that had to be solved. This lower left-hand picture is what the building looks like today. The history of this place, this is where in 1895, this is showing a photograph of a world famous person of importance, Frederick Douglass. His funeral occurred in this particular location. You can get a closer look of what these faux finished wood pieces looked like then. Susan B. Anthony's funeral was also conducted in the space. This is what it looks like today. You can see I worked with one of the finest preservation architects, Michael Doran, Jim Yarrington, Jim Moran, to achieve this space. And we worked together, and it was my job to select the finishes, to work with the acoustician, to achieve a space that would have the correct acoustics, even if there were 15 people in the room for a recital or a rehearsal or just practice of something. This space serves the community in many different ways, and I'm very proud to have been part of it. I never spent longer picking a paint color than I did working with the stained glass windows in that space. Here you can see, this is where the choir sat in the old days. And this wood is all a faux finish. As a matter of fact, Steve Jordan, who's the guru of windows, also is a faux finisher, and he did that project. And I love working with Steve. So what I was saying is, this is a place for small recitals where you have a few people in the audience, as you can see here. For Mona Sagatola Slami on WXXI in Rochester's WXI Public Radio has a program, a live program where people come and eat lunch, presenting another problem for the person picking the upholstery. It has to withstand what happens when people are eating lunch in the room. And we successfully did it because this project was done completed in 1994. And I'm here to tell you the carpet's still there. The upholstery is still there. They finally had to clean some of them, but they did clean. So all of these things have to be taken into consideration in conjunction with your project. This is also used as a place where children learn music in the Karl Orff studies of the Hochstein School. And as I said, it's a place where anybody, no matter what their financial situation is, can come and learn music. I'm very proud to be part of this. This is the Susan B. Anthony House Museum, which is a national landmark, one of two in the city of Rochester. The other one is the George Eastman House on East Avenue. This one sits in a preservation district, as does the George Eastman House. This is the Susan B. Anthony, Frederick Douglass Preservation District in the west side of downtown Rochester. And this was a renovation project as opposed to a restoration project. Here's the difference. And this is the exterior after we finished, with the window treatments that had to be designed especially. It took me about 2.5 years to find the laces for the parlors and the upstairs bedrooms, because they had to have scallops and the certain places. It was a very specific thing I had to look for, and finally found the exact right thing. While the blinds served to protect, I also had the 3M film put on the windows of this house. Had to get that past the preservation committee, the museum committee. And there's another part of it too, which I'll share, that I had to get past this committee, who so carefully monitor what happens in this house. So every inch of the way had to be approved by this committee. I worked with the archivist for the house, who had read every letter that Susan B. Anthony ever wrote, and also those of her sister, who also lived in this beautiful house. This is Susan at her desk, and I comment it looks like mine, because it does. Here's the front parlor. We had photographs to go by and the letters. The photographs, of course, were not in color. So this is why it's not a restoration. We could not find or get what was there in the first place. We could only be appropriate and close to the idea of what they would have chosen in 1900. And that's the date that we went to. Susan died in 1906. Her last renovation of the house, and it was a renovation then too, was in 1900. So that's what we went to. And I found this Bradbury and Bradbury border that I used. A prior designer chose another one that was not appropriate. And when I took on the project, I insisted that I was not going to do the project unless that new installation, fairly new installation, could be removed. So you have to have the guts to stand up to your client as well, because it's going to stand with your name no matter what. So this was changed, and it's really quite close in idea to what you see in the original photo. And of course, the light fixture is quite similar as well. And we do have a lot of her furniture. The back parlor. Now this was a little more tricky, because we really didn't have much to go by, but we wanted to work in the context with the other one. We hired, we hired an artist to design this particular border, because borders were very popular in this time, and was done digitally. And then she produced them digitally. The dining room was really interesting, because this was the picture we had to work with. You can see that the ceiling had a strong pattern, and the walls had a stronger pattern. It took a long time to find this one, because also reading the notes and seeing the receipts, which Susan and her sister kept for everything that they bought that wall covering for 25 cents a roll. So it's going to be interesting. They bought it from either a Montgomery Court Ward catalog or Sears Roebuck catalog. I can't remember which. I think this was a Montgomery Ward catalog. I looked online. I found a company that sold historic wall coverings. I saw these two companions, and I called the company. I happened to get the president of the company on the phone, and I said, well, I'd like some information on this wall covering. Where did this design come from? And he said, this was from the Montgomery Ward catalog of such and such. And I said, by any chance, was it 25 cents a roll? And he said, no, it was 50 cents a roll. And I thought, oh my gosh, eureka. And I said, well, how much is it now? It's $65 a roll. That was back in 1994. So we bought this. Would I put this in my house or your house or any client that wasn't a Victorian? No. But for this project, it is as authentic as we can find, along with the window treatments, which were very much like what Susan and her sister did. This is Susan's office, and then to the right is Mary's office. We knew Mary's had a 3-inch border at the top. We knew Mary loved pink. So even though it doesn't look like pink, it is pink in that room. And then Susan's office in here, the desk is very, very much too clear because that's not the way she lived. She had a busy woman's desk. And this tells a preservation story that I love because this showed a victory for putting the latest technology into a museum and getting that idea approved by a very strong board who really wanted to keep things authentic. We used the same feed as the original light fixture in the room. You see it right there. And I hired somebody from Light Spec, as a matter of fact, to come and give a demonstration of what the lighting could be in the room using LED. Now, back then, it was a fairly new on the market, even though it had been around a while, it was fairly new on the market. So using these tracks so we could aim the MR15 LED lights. Now, what sold them was they have no UV rays, they have no heat, very little heat, compared to an incandescent halogen and other technologies, metal halide. And so they approved this, and it made the difference in the adaptation of this room, which now they had decided that instead of the guest bedroom, where people like Ida B. Wells and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and other suffragettes and abolitionists stayed, this was going to be a museum room telling both stories. And now there are cases in this room where there's artifacts. Very interesting. I hope you can take a tour sometime. And they have tours on, just call their office or check their website. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. The next project is the Miller Pearson House, built in 1867, Italianate, with an addition done in 1914 by a very prolific and prominent Rochester architect, Claude Bragdon. And he used the colonial revival style to modernize this house, because when he did this in 1914, that was the popular style of the day. So he was updating. You can see he took off the original porches on the side and in the front and put in the colonial revival additions. Now, here I did remove walls. This was the kitchen before renovation. It was actually in this room. There you go, right? This little picture right here. That was the kitchen in this house. Behind that door, and in this door, was a pantry. In another part of the room was this room where the iron board, and you can see all the damage that was done through probably a leaky roof along the line, or ice damming. This is what the kitchen looks like today. The wall was removed right here. And how I did that, you can see here on the floor, right there, marrying the old maple floor to the new using a strip of tiger maple. I think there's a slide showing it more. Kept this door, and behind it is still the pantry, kept the moldings and the shelf, used the same color family as the paint of the old one. I designed this rack for the pots and pans storage, using as much of the historic fabric, and my client owned a tremendous collection of things. Here you can see the technique used to marry the old with the new. I have another project where I had 5 different types of wood, and some old and some new, and I had to make it all work. Okay, so here you see that pantry, opening the door. You see the original shelving that was in that pantry. It was lots of fun. Very successful project. The next one is the Park Church, which was built in 1874. Members of that church were the in-laws of none other than, you can see if you can see him in this picture. See if you can find Mark Twain. I'll give you a hint right there. In the bowler hat, of course, a lot of bowler hats were worn in those days, but there he is with his herringbone jacket or coat. And he was a regular attender of that church because he stayed many summers and wrote, like the Connecticut Yankee, what else? Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn. He wrote in his study, which is on the grounds of Elmira College now. So he was part of this historic congregation. And this was going to be remaining a church, unlike the other project, which was an adaptive reuse. This was a renovation to allow this congregation to function in the 21st century. Well, I did it in 1990s, the 1990s into the 2000s. Yes. They wanted to become a greater part of the community by being able to offer their space to help them raise money, to help take care of this building, and also show the history of the community. The preacher of this church was none other than Thomas Beecher, who is the brother of Harriet Beecher Stowe, the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin. So steeped in history, and you feel the weight of that when you're working on a project like this. When this project started, they only had $225,000 of the $1.2 million they were going to need to complete the project. And one of the things that I felt it was very important to do, and was able to get the committee and the congregation to understand this, is that even though there are significant priorities, always mix those priorities, if they are ones that are not visible, mix it with visible items, so the people who are going to be using this space can see wonderful things happen. And it worked. By the time we were in the middle of the project, we had raised, I think, pretty close to $2 million. I might be wrong, but it was well over what we needed to complete the project. So that was very interesting, and I have used that tactic in other projects following that. Here's a photograph of the sanctuary. It looks very much like the Central Presbyterian Church sanctuary, the Hotstein, with the amphitheater. Now, this also had an acoustic problem, or I should say requirements. Because this was a congregational church, for the services, the spoken word was a very important thing. So the acoustics had to be live, because they didn't use microphones going back and forth to different people. The people stood where they were and spoke. This was part of their way of worshiping. Notice the organ. In subsequent pictures, you're going to see that it was removed right here. When I joined the project, this is what I saw. This is where I came in. Notice the molding here on the left. Notice the modernizing of the doorway so it could have a hydraulic closure, a little quieter, supposedly, but a little less expensive than to get these tall doors like they had. Go back, notice there, and they also were underneath the tall doors. So that was going to be an interesting thing. The organ had been moved to the back. This is the completed project. A wonderful day-lit shot. The only carpet we have this is an elongated one. It's really still round. You'll see another one. But the only carpet we have, and we had it custom made for this project, is down the aisle. As you can see, the hardwood underneath the pews remains, and that helps with the acoustic. The choir loft also was treated with just the aisles having the carpet. This is the lighting plan. We hired Jim Benya. I don't know if any of you have worked with Jim Benya. He is the lighting guru. I first met him with an ASID weekend, one of our chapter meetings. He did one of the lectures. He won an award for this, as a matter of fact. In fact, we both won an award for this project. Here we show the skylight and what we found up in there. A poor squirrel or bird or something. I think it's a bird. And you never know what you're going to find. But this was once daylit, and then along the way, they had covered it up for practical reasons. So we relit it so it had the sense of being a skylight. But we also put in a lot of auxiliary lighting. There were 24 different scenarios on the board. But now I wish I could revisit this project, because I'm hoping that they were able to convert to LED. Here's a better view. I was responsible for redesigning the altar area in the chancel, in doing the design of the wood screens, and actually picking the cherry pieces, panels that were going to go here behind. We could light the choir, we could light the pastor, we could light communion, all the above, one of the above. So many different ways of doing that lighting, which made it work very well. This particular project was successful in that it became a very popular venue for community events. The next one is Woodside, which is a Greek revival house just outside of the main city of Rochester. It was one of the early escapes from the Third Ward, or Cornhill, that you saw highlighted in the beginning, where the wealthy moved to get out of the growing city, the noise and the pollution. This house went into private ownership in 2009. It is a Greek revival structure of beautiful, pure example, with its balustrade and cupola and portico and raised basement, all the details that you would put into an academic sketch of this particular style. I was responsible for the renovation and restoration of the interior of this house. This house was originally designed by the Herder Brothers Company, who were the most popular interior design firm possibly in the world in 1889 when they did this room. We used the original drapery rods. We could not use the original leather because it had dried out. This is the finished piece. And I have pieces of the original. That was what the chairs looked like when I came on the project. And we hired a very good upholsterer that found new leather to do the ruined side, but we managed to keep and clean the part on the bottom here of the chair. You see that? This was known as the rabbit room. We chose not to clean the leather here, because that would have done nothing but ruin it. And that's one of the things to remember is you have to know what is good to touch and renew and what is better to be left alone. This was the original sofa, and you can see in the slide there how we reupholstered it with a similar type fabric, but this fabric was made especially for this piece. We could not restore it. I wouldn't have known where to go to get that particular kind of work done. This is the Claude Bragdon bedroom. My job here was to pick an appropriate color for both the wall and the trim. Easy. If you know what the historic colors are. Also finishes here, and also the window treatments using original rods. We were able to, I think that there were a couple that were broken. We were able to repair them. We kept the original mirrors. I hope I'm not driving you crazy with this arrow, but my mouse does not want to move easily along the screen, so it pops up. This is the dining room and the front parlor. My job was the window treatments, which we had sketches of what they looked like when it was a museum. It was a museum showing Greek Revival interiors and what was popular in that particular style of architecture. I also selected the wall finishes. This is the Rowley Keefe house. My part of the world, if you're from the Rochester area, Western New York, is the home for most of the cobblestones in America. Excuse me. When we came upon this house, when I was offered this project, it had been through its history of farm dwelling where families were raised. It had additions put on, you see here. This is a before picture. We'll get closer and you'll see what some of the problems are. The owner was a community called Cobblestone Creek in Victor, New York, and they wanted to make this a public house while they were waiting for their country club to be built. So here's what we did. You can see there was an addition here, an addition here, and this is the after picture. Those additions came off. Also, the farm equipment, the structures that held the farm equipment came off as well. I had to put the picture of the family in because the history of these houses includes this part and what these houses were before. So there was the before. Here are some of the problems that we saw. This is a federal style. So it's one of the earliest styles in our area, if not the earliest. And cobblestone was unique because when the Erie Canal was brought through our area, not only did the ground offer the cobblestones to the masons and artisans that built the Erie Canal, but they were available also to build these houses. Here you see the condition of the porch, which is not as obvious in that photograph. There you see. Here is showing the removal of the additions, the second floor additions, going back to the original cobblestone wall. Here's the architect. I had the privilege of working with John Barrow, as I did on many of my projects. And these were the three areas that you're going to be seeing pictures of with the blue dot. I was responsible for all of it, but we're focusing on these because this is where the lessons lie. This is the dining room before renovation. This actually is a staircase to the basement that was at I'd say 120-degree angle. Not sure. Anyway, it was so steep that you really had to hang on both sides. I think I went down once. It's like I'm losing my voice. Here you see that same wall with a fireplace that we reconstructed and hired someone to do their version of what the cobblestone was. Window treatment that is simple and appropriate to its time, and wall covering that is appropriate to its time. The client had a collection of pewters, so we built this shelf above the doorways to show them, and opened up the walls here so you could see the pantry. Here's a before of the front parlor. As you can see, this house had been neglected for a very long time. An existing condition of the staircase. And I wanted to highlight the design that was there since the very beginning, with just a little bit of difference in color. Colors chosen were all historic colors from historic palettes. And here is the finished front parlor. This clock is an antique, the desk and chair, but the other pieces are not. Again, window treatments appropriate. The carpet was custom designed, and it was taken from one of the motifs in the house. This shows the floors. You see here, 1, 2, 3, but on the other side is another one. And there were actually 5 different types of problems. And I hired Case Flooring, who was willing to work with me to find the stains that were going to blend each and every one. So a different stain was mixed for each and every one. I felt it important because it already was obvious that these were different ages and species. But I wanted the floor to have an harmonious flow through the house rather than having it be jolting in every space. I felt that that was important to the total project. They did it extremely successfully. My design business was before CAD design, so all my projects were hand-drawn. In fact, when my business got to that point, I hired someone in my office to do my CAD. All my plans are done by hand. So here is the plan of the doctor's office, as it's called, because the original owner, I believe, was a dentist. And this particular, see this burning spot here on the fireplace? When I first met my client, who was Marion Wilmot, bless her heart, she had a blowtorch to the paint on that mantle. And this is what I saw when I came in. Oh my gosh. She was one of the best clients I ever had. She wanted to be absolutely 100% involved. And I appreciated that very, very much. Executed this room very simply, simple window treatment. Just using a lovely, very, very dark spruce green. You see the before of this cabinet and the after. This entranceway, we closed off and created a bookshelf for it. But we created another entrance to this area behind. This house became handicapped accessible, and we did it in a way that it was not going to be in the front of the house. It wasn't going to harm the look of the house from the front, from the street. And this came upon a patio and an addition that we kept, and then made it ADA compliant. Okay. If you have questions, we can get to them at the end. I'm not sure what time it is, but I don't want to go over too much. Now, this was a renovation, and this has just a little bit of work. Well, I did a lot of work in the house, but I'm only going to show you a part of this. This is a federal style house built in 1816 in the town of Pittsford. This was a renovation for a client. This is called the Armstrong Hill House. And these are different views of the house and some of the work that had to be done in repairing its cobblestone foundation. And the site is very, very important to this house. My job was to do the living room, redesign the kitchen, and I did the upstairs as well, but I don't think I brought any photographs of that. Had this table custom designed for them, showing off their collection of African artifacts, and but still kept the old moldings, kept the fireplace. The architectural details were kept intact all the way. However, the kitchen was redone in 1895 badly. And kitchens, what kitchens in 1895? But there was a wall. I hopefully have some old pictures of that. These are the completed pictures. I opened up a pantry here because it was a load-bearing wall. John Barrow, the architect, cantilevered the ceiling, and we were able to get enough structure so we could open that up, and we were able to put, have that pantry open, and then also open up this wall to an original fireplace that's in the space. This project is a Philip Berry house. I did the finishes in this house. This is in Georgetown. It's federal style, but this was unique because I didn't have to buy a stick of furniture. They wanted this house, it was going to be restored on the exterior. In the interior, they wanted it restored, the architectural features restored, and then finishes selected, but they only wanted a virtual idea of what the space could look like. So what was fun for me was my friend Elizabeth Holohan, who was the founder of one of the founders of the Landmark Society, and at that time she was a longtime president of the Rochester Historical Society. She had passed away, and the auction of her house, the Oliver Culver House, which is the oldest still standing house in Rochester, New York, was going on the auction block, the house and its contents. And there was a catalog of all the furniture available. I got permission from the estate and from the auction house to utilize the furniture from the catalog and supply the sizes. I supplied the floor plan for all the areas, and Gary Jacobs, a wonderful illustrator, did the renderings. And they used these to market the sale of this house in Georgetown. So all of this would have been in the Oliver Culver house, built in 1816. Her paintings, everything. Here's the dining room plan. All I didn't even do elevations. I just gave him the plan, marked the furniture that I wanted in the catalog, and he did the rest. This one, what time is it? I don't have the time. Are we doing okay?
We are right at 12:05.
Oh.
So I was just turning on my camera and my screen to come on with you.
Okay.
And wanted to see if anyone had questions.
I'll go through these while you're talking. Okay. These are just some other, you keep talking and I'll just show these.
Okay. Thank you for sharing this. This is fascinating, especially being from the upstate New York area and, seeing all these wonderful things. How do you determine what is necessary to keep historically and what can be changed?
My philosophy is if it is part of the original historic fabric of the house, then it's important to try to save it at all costs. Now, the problem that we come into, because a lot of these houses, most of them, have had work done along the way, and that work may have been inappropriate, so historic fabric may have been removed through the years, then that's where the challenge comes. Do we want to try to find out what it looked like, or do we want to find something appropriate to replace it with? So that becomes the challenge. Usually it's finding something appropriate, unless you have clues that are somewhere in the house that have not been compromised. Does that answer the question?
Yes. I was just looking at some of the, like where you pulled out walls and found original fireplaces behind them. It's like, yeah, did you know that fireplace was back there from documents you had previously, or?
Sometimes there are no documents. Sometimes your contractor is finding things under the floor, in the walls, in the ceiling. This is the fun of the project and the challenge of these projects. And not all projects will go into this much historic fabric. A lot of projects, and most of the projects I've done in my career, are neighborhood homes who have had private owners, and some have been taken care of better than others. So there are minor decisions to make, but it's still important to use appropriate color palette, appropriate finishes. Try to repair those windows and remove, if you can, remove the vinyl siding if it was put on the exterior. And that has been done. I have been involved with things like that. So that's the important thing, knowing what to do that's right. And if you don't know the answer or need advice, find the places and the people to do it, either the architect that you're working with or an organization like the Landmark Society, the Onondaga Historical Association, the Arts and Crafts Society in Syracuse. All of those places can offer help and wisdom. It's easier to research a project. What you're looking for on the screen, if you're curious about this collage, this was a sorority house I did in Burlington, Vermont, the Kappa Alpha Theta sorority, which was a Queen Anne house built in 1902. And it was a sorority house for a time. And then they were taken off campus and it was a dormitory. And so I had to convert it back from a dormitory to a house. I just thought this was a fun collage of befores in this house. And the after turned out quite well as well. So if anybody wants to stay on and see some of the pictures, I'm happy to do that. Another question?
Does anyone else have any questions coming in? Those were covering the questions I had that had been entered. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions directly. But
well,
Arlene,
I want to say hi to Dee Chenier, my dear friend. So I'm glad that she's here. Well, while I'm waiting, let me just look at a couple more pictures with you.
Okay.
Okay. Now here's some afters of the foyer. Oh, let's go to the before. Let's see. There's the before and there's the after. All right. There's a before and there's an after, looking into the living room. Before, dormitory room.
Yeah.
And after. Before, bathroom, after. One of the few times I use fluorescent lights and I actually like them. They make your face look airbrushed.
Arlene, it's a fabulous presentation. One of the best I've seen.
Thank you so much. I paid her to say that. I just want you to know I didn't.
That's great. No. It's just great to see you. And
it's nice. I wish I could see you. We'll have to do something.
Thank you, Arlene.
Thank you, Peter. Congratulations, by the way.
You could do that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good news travels fast.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I got to go. Yeah.
Thank you
Okay,
for coming.
Peter, thank you for coming.
Appreciate that.
And congratulations on taking first place for
that's
large
wonderful.
Commercial and small commercial.
And I remember
Design Excellence Awards.
Peter, I remember seeing your name just about on every year.
Really?
for winning. Congratulations on your consistency.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah. So very good presentation and learn a lot. Yeah. So it's totally different. Yeah. So
thank you.
Okay.
I appreciate that. Glad you were here, Peter.
Okay, thank you very much. I got to go. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Yes,
So, Arlene-
Peter is our most decorated.
I know. Designer, please. Yes.
Designer, excuse me.
This,
As you can tell.
I
Yeah.
had to put some design in someplace. This was before and after in the bathroom there,
Oh.
which was fun. Oh, okay. That's not too bad on it. I kept trying to condense the talk in the beginning, and it actually got longer. And I don't know how I did that, but thank you for your patience. It was only supposed to be 55 minutes, and I guess I went over 10 minutes. But it's so good to see everybody. Dee, you look wonderful.
I'm trying. And am I showing now?
Yes.
Oh,
Your beautiful
good.
face.
It's just so good to see you. It's been too
Oh
long.
my gosh. Well, as
And
soon as you open up your country, we're coming.
Oh, good. I know that Vaughn would be beside himself to know that he missed this, and I was late and didn't get in touch with him. So
Well,
he always says hello and how are you?
well, we do correspond through his Instagrams.
Okay.
Yeah, so I keep in touch with him. But I understand this is on YouTube. We are being recorded.
Oh, I
And
hope so.
And so it's going to be on YouTube, which so please tell him that, or I will. And just let me know when we can come, when we can meet. So
I will.
Dee and I
will.
served on the board for many years together, and just developed a wonderful friendship that has lasted a lifetime. It's great.
Yes. Yeah, I miss
And she
you
keeps
a
getting
lot.
younger. You get younger.
I don't
Oh.
think so. You do. You haven't changed 1 inch.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed this.
We want to thank our historian, architecture, interior decorator, and vampire, obviously, because everyone has said you haven't changed in the last 20 years. Thank you so much for this
You're
presentation.
welcome.
It was fascinating, and just the historic photos that you have are just an
Thank you.
amazing.
I have
tool
another,
for
if you
our
want to see some
viewers.
more, I do have one. I have one on Queen Anne purely, the Queen Anne style of architecture in all its glory. That is kind of fun. It shows the 4 subtypes. And then I have one on When More Was More, I was talking about earlier, which highlights the Gilded Age. And it's quite
I
rich.
will definitely reach out to you offline to set up dates for those, because
Okay.
that's is wonderful, and it's just such great content for us to share with our membership on our YouTube page, that they can go in and watch these things, and to have and see your name in there and be like, oh, I could just call Arlene. It's like get a hint as to what I'm doing or thinking. That's fabulous.
Well,
Thank
that's
you for your
good too.
continued support of the society.
Oh my gosh.
All the ladies that are still left on the call, we wouldn't have this chapter if it wasn't for all of you. So thank you very much.
Thank you. This is a very good idea that you have to have this member to member. I'm glad to be part of it.
And I think we should have Arlene again, because she's got more to tell us.
Well, I hope I didn't expound too much. I tend to do that because I want to make sure you have heard everything. So, but I'm happy to come anytime.
Oh, wonderful. So we will be reaching out to you to book in our calendar for the remainder of the year.
Okay.
And I want to thank everyone for coming. And again, Arlene, wonderful. This is just,
thank you.
What an amazing career and what an amazing woman. Thank you for being you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Nice to see you all. Take care.
Okay. Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.
Informative. Thank you.